might say, why is it that African leaders haven't done anything about this deplorable situation? Well, let me tell you, my brother and sister, they have tried.
Welcome. For over 5 decades, an organization was built and sustained, but now the pressing question is, why did they make this move at this particular moment? How will Emmanuel Macron and the French establishment respond? And most importantly, who stands to lose the most, France or the Sahel nations? To fully understand the magnitude of this seismic shift, we must dig deeper and connect the dots. Stay with us as we unravel the truth behind this historic decision. Hit that like and subscribe button because this is the kind of analysis they don't want you to hear. Now let's dive in. In a historic display of African sovereignty and unyielding courage, the military leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Colonel Assimi Goïta, and General Abdourahmane Tiani, have once again struck at the heart of France's fading imperial ambitions. These fearless leaders of the Sahel, united under the banner of the Confederation of Sahel States, AES, have sent shockwaves through the corridors of the Élysée Palace with their latest act of defiance, a joint withdrawal from the International Organisation of la Francophonie, OIF. Announced this week in a bold press release that resonated across the continent and beyond. This move is not just a diplomatic slap for French President Emmanuel Macron, it is a nightmare of existential proportions. It is a public unmasking of France's centuries-long exploitation of Africa and a clarion call for every African leader to rise and break the chains of colonial bondage without fear of Western retribution. For too long, France has masqueraded as a benevolent partner to its former colonies, cloaking its predatory agenda in the guise of cultural unity and linguistic fraternity through institutions like the OIF. But the Sahel's trio of revolutionary leaders has seen through the facade, exposing the OIF for what it truly is, a tool of neocolonial control, a velvet glove over the iron fist of French domination. Their decision to exit this Francophone bloc, announced on March 17th and 18th, 2025 by Burkina Faso and Niger, followed by Mali on March 18th, marks a seismic shift in Africa's geopolitical landscape. It is a rejection not just of a language imposed by colonial violence, but of the entire edifice of French influence that has kept African nations tethered to Paris's whims, from the CFA France's economic shackles to the military bases that once dotted the Sahel like scars of subjugation. Emmanuel Macron, the self-styled modernizer of France, has staked much of his presidency on maintaining France's grip over its African backyard. Yet under his watch, that grip has slipped irreparably. The AES leaders have turned his dreams of a revitalized Francophone Africa into a waking nightmare, exposing the rot at the core of France's African policy. With every audacious step they take, first expelling French troops, Mali in 2022, Burkina Faso in 2023, and Niger by December 2023. Dismantling Operation Barkhane and shattering the myth of France as a security guarantor in the Sahel, they have pivoted toward Russia and other allies, rejecting Western dictates and forging a path of self-reliance through the AES, formalized in September 2023 and cemented as a confederation in July 2024. Now, with their withdrawal from the OIF, they have struck at the cultural and symbolic heart of French hegemony, leaving Macron scrambling to salvage what remains of his nation's dwindling prestige. The OIF, founded in 1970, was meant to be a celebration of French language and culture, uniting 88 member states in a supposed family of Francophone nations. But beneath the rhetoric of solidarity lies a darker truth. It has long served as a mechanism for France to perpetuate its influence, keeping African elites beholden to Parisian approval while extracting billions in resources: gold from Mali, uranium from Niger, and agricultural wealth from Burkina Faso. The AES leaders have called this bluff, declaring in their joint statement that the OIF's actions are incompatible with the constitutional principles based on the sovereignty of the state. This is no mere bureaucratic quibble, it is a philosophical rejection of France's paternalistic claim over African destinies. For Macron, the fallout is catastrophic. France's soft power in Africa, already battered by anti-French sentiment and the expulsion of its diplomats and businesses, now faces a mortal wound. The OIF's credibility is crumbling as 3 of its key African members walk away, signaling to other Francophone nations that the era of blind allegiance to Paris is over. Economically, France stands to lose even more as the AES deepens its economic integration. New passports, effective January 29, 2025, promise freer movement and trade among its citizens, potentially sidelining the CFA franc and French corporations like Orano, which once monopolized Niger's uranium. Politically, Macron's domestic standing, already at a record low with 79% of French citizens disapproving of his leadership as of January 2025, will suffer further as critics seize on this humiliation to paint him as the president who lost Africa. The AES's exit from the OIF is not just a symbolic gesture, it is a strategic masterstroke, a necessary step toward true liberation. For decades, the OIF has been a Trojan horse for French interests, promoting a language and culture that were forcibly imposed through colonial conquest while stifling indigenous identities. In Mali, the Bambara, Fulani, and Songhai languages predate French by centuries, yet they have been relegated to second-class status in favor of the colonizer's tongue. Burkina Faso's Moray and Niger's Hausa carry the wisdom of ancient empires, yet French has been the gatekeeper to education and power. By rejecting the OIF, Traoré, Goïta, and Tiani are reclaiming their nation's voices, asserting that sovereignty begins with the right to define oneself outside the shadow of colonial legacies. This move also exposes the hypocrisy of the OIF's leadership. Since 2018, the organization has been chaired by Louise Mushikiwabo, a Rwandan who hails from an Anglophone regime that abandoned French in favor of English over a decade ago. Rwanda's presence at the OIF's helm, while it cozies up to the British Commonwealth, underscores the absurdity of France's claim to linguistic unity. If the OIF can tolerate such contradictions, why should Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger remain shackled to it? Their departure strips away the illusion of a cohesive Francophone bloc, revealing it as a hollow shell propped up by African compliance. Moreover, the withdrawal aligns with the AES's broader vision of self-determination. These nations have already severed ties with the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, in January 2024, condemning it as a Western puppet that imposed inhumane sanctions on them after their coups. They have expelled French and American forces, replacing them with Russian partnerships that, while not perfect, offer a counterweight to Western hegemony. The OIF exit is the latest brick in this edifice of independence, signaling to the world that the Sahel will no longer be a playground for foreign powers. It is a decision rooted in the belief that Africa's future lies not in begging for scraps from Paris, but in building alliances among its own people, alliances like the AES, which plans a joint force of 5,000 troops to combat terrorism on its own terms. The AES's defiance is a beacon for every African leader still trembling under the gaze of Western capitals. For too long, the continent's rulers have danced to the tune of Paris, London, and Washington, fearing economic reprisals, military coups, or assassination if they dared to step out of line. The ghosts of Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, and Muammar Gaddafi loom large, reminders of the West's ruthless intolerance for African autonomy. Yet the Sahel's trio has shown that fear can be conquered, that boldness backed by unity and popular support can topple even the mightiest of oppressors. Consider the stakes. France alone extracts an estimated $500 billion annually from its former colonies through the CFA franc system, a colonial relic that ties 14 African economies to the French treasury. Its military presence until recently ensured that any leader who challenged this order faced swift retribution. But Burkina Faso's Traoré, a 36-year-old revolutionary in the mold of Sankara, has stared down these threats, surviving assassination attempts and rallying his people against French plunder. Mali's Goïta has weathered ECOWAS sanctions and French propaganda, emerging stronger with Russian drones and a renewed national spirit. Niger's Tiani has defied U.S. pressure to retain bases in Agadez, choosing instead to nationalize its uranium and rewrite its future. These leaders prove that the West's power is not invincible. It thrives only as long as Africa consents to it. Their withdrawal from the OIF should inspire others, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, Cameroon, to question why they remain in institutions that serve foreign masters. Why should Chad, which expelled French troops in February 2025, still bow to the OIF's dictates? Why should Togo or Benin, facing jihadist threats spilling from the Sahel, not join the AES in crafting an African solution to African problems? The time for timidity is over. The West's threats of sanctions, isolation, or regime change are hollow when met with a united front, as the AES has demonstrated. As France reels from this latest blow, the AES stands poised to redefine the Sahel's destiny. The Confederation's plans new passports, a joint military, and economic integration herald a future where African nations dictate their own terms, free from the meddling of former colonizers. For Macron, this is a personal and national disaster, a legacy of failure that will haunt him long after his presidency ends. But for Africa, it is a triumph, a testament to the power of courage and solidarity. The Pan-African dream of a continent unshackled, prosperous, and proud draws closer with every step that AES takes. Let this be a lesson to all African leaders. The West's dominance is not eternal. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have lit the torch of liberation, exposing France's exploitative practices and breaking colonial ties without fear. It is time for the rest of the continent to pick up that torch and run toward a future where Africa answers to no one but itself. Before concluding, allow me to address our African leaders directly. For far too long, the African continent has been locked in a humiliating dance with the West, a dance where our leaders, adorned in the borrowed robes of subservience, twirl to the tune of foreign masters, all for the promise of crumbs disguised as aid and loans. This is not a partnership. It is a plantation system reborn, where the overseers sit in Washington, London, and Paris, cracking the whip of conditionalities while our so-called leaders bow their heads, palms outstretched, ready to pocket the spoils of their betrayal. Enough is enough. It is time for African leaders to break free from this cycle of exploitation, to reject the West's poison chalice, and to stand tall as architects of a new African destiny, one that shakes the globe to its core. Across this vast and vibrant continent, from the shores of the Atlantic to the highlands of the Horn, the story remains the same. Western organizations like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, and an array of donor nations dangle their financial carrots before us, promising development, stability, and progress. But what do we see instead? Debt traps that strangle our economies, policies that enrich foreign corporations while impoverishing our people, and leaders who grow fat on the proceeds of this Faustian bargain. The aid comes with strings that pull our nations into perpetual dependence, ensuring that Africa remains a supplier of raw materials, a dumping ground for cheap goods, and a playground for neo-colonial fantasies. And where does this money end up? Not in schools, not in hospitals, not in the hands of farmers or entrepreneurs, but in the Swiss bank accounts of corrupt elites who care more for their Western puppeteers than their own people. This is not a new tale. For decades, Africa has been bled dry under the guise of assistance. The West's so-called generosity is a Trojan horse, a mechanism to keep us tethered to their interests. Take the example of resource extraction. Multinational corporations from Europe and North America plunder our gold, our oil, our cobalt, and our diamonds, leaving behind environmental devastation and paltry royalties. In the Congo, children toil in mines to extract minerals that power the world's smartphones, yet the Congolese people see no wealth, no progress, only misery. In Nigeria, oil flows like rivers, but the Niger Delta is a wasteland of pollution and poverty, while Western oil giants count their billions. This is the aid they offer us, the privilege of watching our wealth spirited away while we beg for loans to survive. And what of these loans? They are shackles disguised as lifelines. The IMF and World Bank impose structural adjustment programs that demand austerity, slashing public spending, privatizing national assets, and opening markets to foreign domination. Our governments comply, eager to please their creditors even as their citizens starve. In Zambia, debt repayments consume more of the national budget than health and education combined, yet the copper mines remain in foreign hands. In Ghana, the promise of Western investment has led to land grabs that displace farmers, all while the profits sail across the ocean. This is not development, it is daylight robbery, sanctioned by African leaders too timid or too complicit to say no. But there is hope on the horizon, a beacon of courage that should shame every leader who still kneels at the West's altar. Look to Burkina Faso, where Captain Ibrahim Traoré has emerged as a lion among men. At just 37 years old, this revolutionary soldier has dared to do what so many of his peers lacked the spine for. He has stared down the West and demanded respect. Since taking power in 2022, Traoré has expelled French troops from Burkinabe soil, rejecting the colonial hangover that allowed foreign militaries to meddle in African affairs. He has nationalized key industries, redirecting wealth to the people rather than foreign capitals. He speaks not of begging, but of building of self-reliance, dignity, and sovereignty. Traoré is no saint, and his path is fraught with challenges, but his bravery is a clarion call to every African leader. The time for cowardice is over. Why then do so many of our leaders cling to the West's coattails? Why do they attend summits in Brussels and Washington, nodding along to lectures on good governance while their nations crumble? The answer is simple: personal gain. The aid and loans they secure are not for Africa. They are for themselves: a new mansion in London, a private jet, a child's tuition at Harvard. These are the rewards for selling out their people. They fear the West's rat sanctions, coups, or character assassination in the global press, but they fear their own people less because they have mastered the art of suppression. This is the tragedy of Africa. Too many of our leaders are not liberators but middlemen, brokering our exploitation for a cut of the profits. It is time to break this cycle. African leaders must summon the courage to exit the organizations that bind us to servitude. The IMF and World Bank are not our saviors, they are our jailers. The United Nations, with its Security Council dominated by former colonial powers, offers no justice for Africa, only platitudes. The Commonwealth, a relic of British imperialism, mocks our independence with every meeting. Why do we remain in these clubs that offer us no seat at the table? Why do we send our brightest minds to negotiate with institutions that see us as beggars rather than equals? We must walk away boldly, proudly, and without apology. But walking away is not enough. We must build. Africa is not poor. It is rich beyond measure, rich in resources, in talent, in potential. What we lack is the will to harness this wealth for ourselves. Imagine an African Union transformed, not the toothless bureaucracy it is today, but a powerful bloc with its own financial institutions, its own trade networks, its own military alliances. Imagine an African Development Bank that funds infrastructure without the West meddling, an African Trade Organization that prioritizes our markets over theirs, an African Security Council that defends our borders from foreign interference. This is not a dream, it is a necessity. With 1.4 billion people, a landmass larger than China, India, and the United States combined, and resources that fuel the global economy, Africa has the power to shake the world if only our leaders would believe it. The West will not like this. They will cry foul, impose sanctions, and label us rogue states. Let them. Their tantrums are the death throes of a dying order. The global South is rising. China, India, and Russia are already challenging Western hegemony. Africa must join this shift, not as a junior partner, but as a titan in its own right. Our leaders must be brave like Traoré, like Thomas Sankara before him, like Kwame Nkrumah, who dreamed of a united Africa free from foreign yoke. They must face the West not with pleas but with demands. Respect our sovereignty, pay for what you take or get out. To the African people I say this, hold your leaders accountable. They will not change unless we force them to. March in the streets, organize in the villages, demand that the wealth of this continent stays here. To the leaders I say, history is watching. Will you be remembered as puppets who sold your birthright for a pittance, or as giants who built an Africa that commands the world's respect? The choice is yours, but the time for begging is over. Rise, Africa, rise. The hour of reckoning has come.